In my opinion, Otis Redding is one of the most powerful and special musical talents that America ever produced, but we never got to see exactly what he could do, and we never got to hear everything he could have said. So, this is the story of Otis Redding and what could have been. Before we get started, I want to give a special shout out to my friend Jacob from the What's Your Spaghetti Policy podcast. He recently became a member of this channel, so thank you for that. That's super exciting. Membership is the best way to directly support what I'm doing here and partner with me as I'm trying to learn more about music history. It's just kind of a way to be more involved in this channel if you appreciate what I'm doing. So you can click the link below in the description thingy and sign up that way if you feel like it. If not, liking the video if you liked it and subscribing is still a great way to support. That really helps as well. So make sure you do that if you want. Otis Redding Jr. was born in Dawson, Georgia in 1941. He was the first son but the fourth child of a sharecropper named Otis Redding Sr., as you might expect, and Fanny Roseman. As sharecroppers, they actually worked on the same plantation that Otis Sr.'s parents had worked, so they didn't have a ton of money, as you also might expect from sharecroppers. But his father was also a pastor, and when Otis was 2 years old, though I've seen other sources say that he was 5, others say he was like 7, who knows, somewhere in the early part of his life, his father moved Otis and the family to Macon, Georgia, where his father was pastoring the Vineville Baptist Church. Soon after that, Otis started singing in the choir there and getting way more interested in music. And since he was already interested in music and was already performing as part of the choir, it just made sense that he would join the school band when he was in school. He was already singing in the choir, obviously, but also playing drums for the choir and learning a little bit of guitar as well. So the school band helped him develop those talents a little bit more. His parents also noticed his talent and they put him in music lessons, but he had kind of started to move beyond church music. Around this time, he was falling in love with that golden age of rock and roll sound. Artists like Little Richard, who became probably his biggest influence. He would sneak into local nightclubs to see these kind of artists perform as often as he could. And according to one historian and author named Mark Ribosky, Otis's father really didn't like the kind of music that Otis was interested in, this new rock and roll music. He was deeply religious and balked at the whole secular music scene. And according to Mark, Otis Sr. and Otis Jr. didn't have the best relationship. They weren't like fighting. I'd not seen anything that suggests that Otis Sr. was abusive in any way. It's just Otis didn't feel as connected. He didn't feel as supported as maybe we would want someone to be. Otis felt like he needed to do it on his own if he wanted to actually make a go at being a musician professionally. When he was a teenager, his father became sick with tuberculosis, so Otis had to drop out of school and help the family by getting odd jobs, kind of like digging wells and other sort of menial tasks. But he also started competing in the local theater's talent show, where the winner would get $5. He won the competition 15 times in a row and then was not allowed to compete anymore. In 1958, a local DJ was hosting a talent competition called the Teenage Party, and Otis wanted to participate in that. It would kind of end up changing his life in a weird way. That disc jockey, who was known as King B, real name Hamp Swain, probably Hamp now that I'm looking at it, was Macon's first black DJ and was something of a local celebrity in the area. He sponsored those shows on Saturday mornings. They started at the Roxy Theater. Eventually, they would move into the Douglas Theater. At one of those teenage parties in 1958, Johnny Jenkins saw Otis perform, and he fell in love with his style and his sound. Johnny had a band he called the Pine Toppers, and he was touring around the South, mostly playing fraternity parties when he saw Otis. And according to him, quote, "So I went up to him and I said, 'Do you mind if I play behind you? I can make you sound good.' Well, he sounded great with me playing behind him, and he knowed it." But as is always the case with histories like this, especially when we get further into the past with more popular artists, there are differing stories of this period of Otis's life. The first one being how he met Johnny. Otis had acquired a manager sometime in the late 50s, a guy named Phil Walden, that I read in one place was a childhood school friend, but I'm not sure if that's accurate. That could just be a random thing. I'm sorry, there's going to be a lot of things that I'm not sure are accurate in this video. I did the best I could. But there's a story that Phil Walden was the one who introduced Otis to Johnny Jenkins instead of Johnny like seeing him at the teenage party. But either way, Otis is now traveling with the Pine Toppers, essentially acting as their road manager and valet and just kind of a general roadie for them, sometimes singing and performing with them as well. I'll also take a step back here and in the interest of saying all of the research I found tell you other stories I heard that I wasn't able to verify as much as I was the Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Topper story, but commonly floating around as ways that Otis might have gotten into the industry. So take these with a grain of salt, but you'll commonly hear these stories as well. People say that he also performed for a bit with Little Richard's band, who are calling themselves the Upsetters, and people say that he played with Pat T. Cake's band called the Mighty Panthers, but I'm not sure that either of those actually happened. It's possible he played one-off shows with them or brief tours. I stuck with the sources I trusted, but what I do know is that he was playing around the southern circuits, really developing his sound and his style and trying to figure out how to make it in the music industry. There's also stories about Otis going out on his own to Los Angeles in 1959 to try and make it as a performer and a musician, and the people who played with him while he was out there said that they recognized his talent and knew that he was really special, but he hadn't found his sound yet. He just sounded like a knockoff Little Richard. So they knew he needed to kind of nail down who he wanted to be and get his own authentic voice out there. Also in the late 50s, Otis met a waitress named Zelma Atwood. She was also a high school dropout and just trying to navigate the racial tensions of the South when she met Otis. She recalled, quote, "When I first met him, I knew he was going to do great, but I didn't know whether it was going to be with music. I just knew he was a great person. He was very ambitious and he was very serious about what he was doing. He was not the big Otis Redding at that time." The couple got married in 1961 and would end up having 3 children. They stayed married until Otis's death, even through his many pretty well documented infidelities while on the road. She wrote a poem that Otis used as the basis for his song "I've Got Dreams to Remember." She didn't know that he recorded that until it was released after his death, so she got songwriting royalties from it for quite a while.
I got to come on in. I ain't lying.
In the early 60s, Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Toppers heard about Stax Records. Stax started in 1957 as a country label, but once it moved to Memphis and cut an R&B song by a father-daughter duo named Rufus and Carla Thomas, they had a regional hit in the R&B market, so that got Stax a distribution deal with Atlantic, which came with much more opportunity for success, but also shifted their focus away from country music into R&B. Carla's next song with Stax, distributed through this Atlantic deal, was a top 10 hit. Stax quickly became a powerhouse label for soul musicians, and there's a lot of reasons for that, including their location and their own music store attached to the label where they could feel out what kids were liking, but a good portion of their success is due to their studio band, Booker T and the MGs, led by Booker T. Jones. Contrasted with the tight-fisted control that Berry Gordy had over the other major R&B label Motown, the owners of Stax largely let Booker and his band have the freedom to play what they felt the song needed, and that created a whole new thing that's now commonly called the Memphis sound. Anyway, these labels would often let regional up-and-coming artists come into the studio and cut some demos to see if they wanted to work with them. Johnny heard about this, so Otis drove the band up to Memphis in 1962 in order for Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Toppers to cut a demo. I did hear somewhere that Atlantic was actually interested in Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Toppers, so they sent them to Memphis to cut a demo. It wasn't like a "we're doing this on our own volition" thing. It was the label already knew about him and wanted them kind of thing. Booker T remembered meeting Otis for the first time and seeing him that first time he came into the studio, and he said Otis was a valet for a band from Georgia, and he was carrying the clothes and he was doing the driving and going for the food and coffee and shining shoes or whatever he had to do to keep the band going. Now I remember the day he pulled up with Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Toppers was the name of the group he was working for. They just basically came in and he sat around and waited, and they did their demo for Stax. And after they did their demo, Otis asked if he could sing a song, which was a little inappropriate, but we allowed him. They had about 30 minutes left in their studio time. Otis got up there, he sang a ballad called "These Arms of Mine," and when Stu Axton, who was the founder of Stax Records, heard that, he knew there was something special about it. So he put it out in 1962, and it became a regional hit. They had found something special with Otis Redding. So by 1963, Otis is signed to Stax Records. Well, a subsidiary of Stax Records, and he's recording music. They kind of let him arrange his own stuff. They recognized his talent in that way, which I think is really special. They took some of the songs from that initial recording he did in that 30-minute window and also some new stuff, and they put out his debut album in 1964, "Pain in My Heart." It did okay in the charts, and it was received pretty well by critics, but it wasn't a smash success by any means. It didn't catapult Otis into superstardom. Working with Stax, Otis became a major force because he was a total total package. He could write, he could sing, he could produce, he could perform, though he quite famously couldn't dance well at all. But there were allegations of plagiarism that kind of shadowed a lot of his career, especially in his songwriting. Otis always claimed that he was the original songwriter of the song Respect. His story is that he was complaining about Zelma to his drummer Al Jackson, and Al responded with, "What are you griping about? You're on the road all the time. All you can look for is a little respect when you come home." And Zelma tells a similar story about Otis writing Respect, but in her version, it's an employee complaining about their wife and not Otis complaining. Zelma said, "Yes, it goes way back to when one of his employees was kind of unhappy with some of his problems he was having with his life. He said all he wanted was to have his wife give him some respect when he came home." And that's how the song started. But there's another story that it was actually written by an artist named Speedo Sims, who brought it to Otis Redding, and Speedo planned on cutting it with his group called the Singing Demons. Speedo and Otis were friends. Speedo is his road manager, essentially, so they knew each other pretty well. Whenever Speedo brought Otis that song, Otis changed a few things and he sped it up. Speedo's version was more ballady, and Otis's version was kind of that more poppy song that we know these days. But Speedo was struggling to schedule the recording time that he needed to actually cut the song, so Otis said, "I'm just gonna cut it instead." Speedo agreed because he thought, at least I'll get songwriting credits on it, at least I'll make something from it. But he never did. Otis put it out, said he was the songwriter, and Speedo never got credit for it. Some people also claim that Otis wrote the song, but he wrote it with Speedo in mind, so the stories got a little bit crossed there. But at the end of the day, a younger artist named Aretha Franklin wanted to record it and just kind of took it away from him anyway. There's been conflicting accounts about how Otis actually felt about Aretha making Respect her kind of breakout seminal song. Some people say that Otis was kind of a little frustrated about it because he liked it and now it's her song, but other people say he really enjoyed the money that he made off of that smash success. Otis did tell the crowd at the Monterey Pop Festival when he played it, quote, "This next song is a song that a girl took away from me. A good friend of mine, this girl, she just took the song, but I'm still going to do it anyway." Either way, that song became a part of Otis's enduring legacy as a songwriter. Otis continued to write and record and release soul music for Stax Records, and his fame steadily grew, especially within the soul and R&B market. He released his Otis Blue album in 1965 that many people saw as the best album he ever released. Most of the songs on it were covers, but they were soul staples, so it was kind of like Otis's entrance into the soul canon in a way. It did pretty well commercially, and critics love it, often calling it one of the best albums and the definitive soul album of the 60s. In an interview, Otis talked about his recording sessions and how tightly controlled they were, saying, "We always have the same guys on the recordings. We don't have contract trouble like you do here." He was in England, so he's talking about that. "I always have Steve Cropper on guitar, Al Jackson on drums, he's too much, then a guy called Duck on bass guitar, and Isaac Hayes, who does the arrangements for Sam and Dave, plays piano." Then he explained the schedule of a typical recording day, saying, "We all get up and down to the studios at 12 midday and work through until 9 in the evening. All the songwriting is done in the studio. We don't get it prepared outside beforehand, no. Then we quit, go home and relax and sleep. Everybody has a good think about the things they've been doing and then comes back the next day at 12, always at 12, fresh and with a lot of new ideas. That's it." Throughout all of this, Otis is moving a million miles a minute. He's either on the road constantly, or whenever he's off the road, he's writing and recording. It's just this kind of intense whirlwind of the music industry. Apparently, when Otis played at the Monterey Pop Festival, he saw a bunch of white younger people going crazy about his music, and he thought that maybe that meant he could cross over, like Sam Cooke had done. But Al Bell, who was an executive at Stax Records, said that he might be in danger of being only a genre musician. He was being wrapped up in that soul sound, so maybe he needed to change his direction and his style to break through instead of releasing the same music he was making and hoping that that eventually would break through. Al was suggesting maybe we need to switch it up a little bit and try something else if that's actually what you want to do. Al remembered suggesting, quote, "He would have to come up with something different. We talked back and forth on it. I suggested he write something folk-like, saying we could call it soul folk. It was the only time I told Otis what to do." Otis had been listening to a lot of Bob Dylan around this time and really loving Bob Dylan. He had also been listening to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, as everyone else in the world was doing at the time. And those two artists really helped him understand the importance of the lyrics of songs, of telling stories. But they also showed him new things he could do in the studio, new recording techniques that were available to him. So with all of this happening, it's pretty clear that Otis was on the verge of changing his sound entirely. Also, his life was changing. He was realizing that he was in love with someone who wasn't Zelma. He had always been pretty close with Carla Thomas, who was known as the Queen of Memphis Soul. They even recorded a duet album together, but there were rumors that they were closer than they should have been, and Otis planned on leaving his wife for her. An anonymous source told the Daily Mail, quote, "I witnessed Carla and Otis together more than they should have been during the times they performed. In studio, out of studio, you name it, they were always together. Carla had a child in her younger days, but never made it public information because it had actually belonged to Otis Redding." Obviously, I have no idea if that is true at all, but I do know that it's pretty well documented and attested that Otis was consistently unfaithful to Zelma, that she knew about it. She wasn't necessarily okay with it, but she told him just don't bring anything home. And I think it's kind of clear to see that Otis was getting a little bit dissatisfied with where he was at in his life. According to some people, he was even planning on leaving Stax Records and starting his own record label where he could have even more creative control over his music. So while all of this is happening, during a 6-night residency in San Francisco, he accepted the offer to stay at Bill Graham's houseboat. Bill Graham was like super popular concert promoter during that time period. He accepted an offer to stay at his houseboat that was kind of outside of the city just to get a little bit of peace, a little bit of quiet. So he and Speedo Sims were hanging out on the houseboat, and Otis was just strumming his guitar and repeating some lyrics. Speedo remembered, "We must have been out there 3 or 4 days before I could get any concept as to where he was going with the song. I just didn't understand it. And lyrically, it sounded weird. He was changing with the times, and I was looking at the times change." But he couldn't quite nail that song, so he set it aside for a bit, and he had surgery because he had some issues with his vocal cords that were apparently pretty major. He couldn't speak for a while. He just had to communicate through writing notes during the recovery. But then, according to some people, once he was actually discharged from the hospital, his voice was better than ever. When he finally finished that song he was working on the houseboat, he knew it was a hit and he rushed to record it. The song, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay, became probably his most enduring and biggest song in the legacy of Otis Redding. But some people at Stax didn't want to record it because they thought it was too different from what Otis was known for. It wasn't his sound. Otis insisted that it would be his first #1 record. It would eventually be his biggest hit and fully cross him over into the mainstream market, but he never got to see it released. 2 days after the recording session, Otis was back on the road and he boarded a plane. He'd actually been working on getting his pilot's license. He even wanted to build a runway at his house, but as far as we know, he was not flying the plane that day. He was scheduled to perform in Madison, Wisconsin on December 10th, 1967. So earlier that afternoon, he and his band hopped in a plane that he had recently bought to make the flight from Cleveland to Madison. It wasn't the best weather, but the pilot assured Otis that he could make the flight safely. But as James Brown later recalled, that plane was an old plane with a bad battery and a lot of service problems, and it had no business flying in that kind of weather. About 4 miles outside of the Madison airport, the plane crashed into the lake, killing everyone on board except the trumpet player Ben Colley, who remembered he woke up and had a, quote, "tremendous feeling that we were in a spin," adding, "I'm certain the plane just broke apart." Colley recalled hearing different members of the band calling for help, and he tried to swim to them, but they'd all gone under the water by the time that he could get there. So it sounds like others survived the impact, but couldn't make it out of the frozen lake. Colley said that the mechanics in Nashville said that the plane's battery was not producing full power, which would have made landing with instruments really difficult, and the pilot would have needed his instruments to land because of all of the fog in the area. So it's likely that just the bad weather and kind of faulty electronics on the plane probably caused the pilot to land in the lake instead of on the runway. Another member of Otis Redding's band, James Alexander, survived because he was the only member who took a commercial flight instead of getting on that plane. The plane wasn't big enough to fit the entire band on the flight, so James originally thought he drew the short straw and had to go by himself on a commercial flight. So he was kind of waiting at the venue, and all of the fans were already lined up to get inside, and they were waiting to hear any news about the plane landing and Otis being on his way. He said said, quote, "But we didn't hear from anyone. We didn't panic at first. Then finally we were told that the plane had gone down. We said, 'The plane has gone down?' From that point on, I was in shock." James was the one who eventually identified Otis's body. He said that divers searched the wreck for 3 days, and he identified Otis on the second day. He was still strapped to his seat. Not long after, Ben Colley and James Alexander revived Otis's band, which was called the Bar-Kays, and kept it going until Ben passed away in 2015. Now James calls himself the sole survivor and is still playing with a version of Otis's band. As of 2022, Zelma Redding still lived in a ranch house outside of Macon. She never remarried and said, quote, "Never will. I love being Mrs. Otis Redding. I'm the only one." She got a high school equivalency degree, and then Otis's manager, Phil Walden, got her a job at a booking agency. She eventually started her own agency and opened a nightclub. She worked really hard to understand the business side of the music industry so that she could make sure to get all of the royalties that her family was due in order to care for her children. Through the Otis Redding Foundation, she helped to build the Otis Redding Center for the Arts in downtown Macon that is dedicated to helping young people explore music and learn how to create music. She has kept his dream of helping Macon grow and supporting young musicians alive through her tireless work. As for Dock of the Bay, Otis's longtime guitarist and partner, Steve Cropper, really wanted to put it out, even if people at Stax didn't fully understand what it was. Steve knew it was something special, and he knew how important it was to Otis. So he sent it to Jerry Wexler, who was the head of Atlantic Records. Jerry listened to it, didn't really understand it, but he said there was something off about the vocals, so it needed to be remixed. So he sent it back to Steve. Steve said, "I'll remix it," but ended up not changing anything and just sending it back to Jerry Wexler, who then said, "Yeah, it sounds great now." And they put it out, and it became the first ever posthumous #1 in history. That's the story of Otis Redding. He was a magnificent talent, larger than life musical ability. Just such a shame that he died so young. He died at the age of 26. I don't think I mentioned that, but just looking at what he could have done if he had been around longer, looking at the way his sound and style was changing and just how incredible a lot of that music could have been. Such a shame that we didn't get that output of his later life. Let me know what you think about the video. Use the comments below. Like the video if you ended up enjoying it. And subscribe if you want to join me as I try and learn more about music history. That's kind of the point of this channel. That's what I'm doing here. And thank you once again to all of our musical historians. It's really cool that you want to partner with me and want to be a part of what I'm doing here. I really appreciate it.